The rain slammed against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse boardroom. High above the neon-soaked streets of Seoul, the city looked like a glittering ocean of secrets. Inside the sprawling mahogany room, Maya moved like a shadow. She wore a starched, ill-fitting gray uniform that marked her as nothing more than the night shift cleaner. Her hands gripped a damp cloth, methodically wiping down the massive table where empires were bought and sold. The heavy oak doors suddenly burst open, letting in a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive cigars. 5 older men marched into the room. They were the reigning heads of the Korean Mafia Council, men who commanded armies and dictated the fate of the city. At their center was Chairman Sung-ho, a man with a face carved from stone and eyes devoid of mercy. He stripped off his soaked, heavy cashmere overcoat and, without a single glance in Maya's direction, threw it directly onto her cleaning cart. The weight of the wet fabric sent her meticulously organized bottles crashing to the marble floor. The sharp sound echoed through the cavernous room, but none of the men flinched. They did not see a person. They saw a piece of furniture, a mute servant who only spoke English, an invisible woman who existed solely to wipe away their messes. Maya did not gasp. She did not cry. She knelt slowly on the cold marble, her dark hands picking up the plastic bottles. In their world she was a ghost. But ghosts heard everything. And as she kept her head bowed, hiding the fierce, calculating fire in her eyes, she prepared to listen. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the icy air fill her lungs. Tonight was the night everything would change. The night the invisible woman would finally step into the light. Maya moved silently to the corner of the vast room, pressing herself into the shadows near the antique liquor cabinet. She poured amber liquid into 5 heavy crystal glasses, the ice clinking softly against the sides. The council members settled into their high-backed leather chairs, completely ignoring her presence. They assumed she was just another uneducated foreign worker, completely blind and deaf to the dangerous world they inhabited. As Chairman Sung-ho took his glass from the silver tray Maya held out, he began to speak in rapid, sharp Korean. He laughed, a cruel, grating sound that bounced off the glass walls. He told the men around the table that tonight would mark the end of their biggest problem. The problem he spoke of was Seo Jun, the young, fiercely intelligent, and ruthless new boss of the Western District. Seo Jun had been taking territory at an alarming rate, demanding modern changes and threatening the old, corrupt ways of the council. Sung-ho boasted to the table that this peace treaty they were about to sign was nothing but a beautifully wrapped lie. The other 4 bosses chuckled, blowing thick plumes of smoke into the air. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his jaw, asked if the young wolf suspected anything. Sung-ho took a slow sip of his whiskey and shook his head, his face twisting into a mocking grin. He said Seo Jun was too arrogant, too blinded by the prospect of a formal seat at their table to see the blade resting against his throat. Maya stood perfectly still. Her breathing remained steady, but beneath the starched fabric of her uniform, her heart hammered against her ribs. She understood every single word they spoke. For months, she had been the invisible wallflower, cleaning their blood-stained floors, emptying their ash trays, and absorbing their most heavily guarded secrets. They thought her lack of Korean meant a lack of intelligence. They had no idea that she had spent years mastering the language, studying not just the formal tones but the subtle, dangerous dialects of the underworld. She knew the names of their politicians, the locations of their hidden vaults, and the depths of their betrayals. Tonight they were planning a slaughter. As Maya wiped down a side table, she glanced toward the heavy oak doors. Seo Jun was walking straight into an execution. She had no allegiance to the young boss, but she had a deep, burning hatred for the men sitting at the table. Sung-ho had destroyed lives without a second thought, and Maya had waited patiently in the dark for the perfect moment to strike. Every polished shoe and perfectly tailored suit in this room was paid for with the suffering of innocent people. Maya knew their time was running out. She would make sure of it. The massive doors swung open once again, and the laughter in the boardroom died instantly. Seo Jun stepped across the threshold. He was a stark contrast to the older men at the table. Dressed in an immaculate razor-sharp black suit, he moved with the predatory grace of a man who knew he was being hunted but walked into the forest anyway. His dark eyes swept the room, cataloging every shadow, every face, and lingering for a fraction of a second on Maya before locking onto Sung-ho. The air grew freezing cold. Sung-ho stood up, his face breaking into a wide, impossibly fake smile. He spread his arms in a gesture of false brotherhood and welcomed Seo Jun in heavily accented English, playing the part of the accommodating elder. He motioned for the young boss to take the seat directly across from him. Seo Jun unbuttoned his jacket with fluid precision and sat down, his posture perfectly straight. He did not smile back. He demanded to see the contract immediately, stating in flawless English that he was not there to waste time drinking with ghosts of the past. Sung-ho's smile twitched, a brief flash of genuine hatred bleeding through his polite mask. He nodded slowly and snapped his fingers in Maya's direction, ordering her to bring the documents. Maya retrieved the leather-bound folder from the side desk and walked toward the center of the room. As she approached, she kept her eyes glued to the floor, playing the role of the terrified, submissive maid. She placed the folder gently in front of Seo Jun. For a brief moment, Seo Jun looked up at her. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, an unspoken acknowledgement of her humanity that the other men had never shown, but he quickly returned his attention to the paper. Sung-ho leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He began to outline the terms of the territory split, using smooth, diplomatic English to paint a picture of mutual prosperity and respect. He spoke of shared docks, divided supply lines, and a new era of peace. Seo Jun listened intently, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest of his chair. But as the negotiation dragged on, Sung-ho casually turned his head toward his second-in-command sitting to his right. He dropped the English entirely. He did not even use standard Korean. Instead, Sung-ho began speaking in a rapid, guttural Jeju regional dialect, a rare and complex tongue almost entirely incomprehensible to outsiders. He murmured that the snipers were already positioned on the rooftop across the street, waiting for the signal. He instructed his man to lock the doors the moment the ink dried on the paper. Maya stood frozen by the wall. The blood drained from her face. It was her grandmother's native tongue. She understood the exact shape of the death warrant being signed. The heavy rain continued to batter the glass, masking the sound of the inevitable betrayal. She had only moments to decide if she would remain a ghost or risk everything to burn their empire to the ground. Sung-ho leaned back in his heavy leather chair, a look of immense satisfaction washing over his weathered face. He believed he had the young wolf entirely trapped within the walls of this penthouse. To demonstrate his absolute power in the room, he decided to play a cruel game with the only person lower on the hierarchy than a rival boss. He snapped his thick fingers loudly, the sound cracking like a whip through the tense silence of the boardroom. He did not look at Maya when he ordered her in sharp, degrading English to bring more ice for his whiskey. Maya kept her face completely blank, masking the storm of rage and calculation swirling in her mind. She walked with measured, submissive steps toward the silver bucket resting on the antique mahogany side table. She picked up the crystal tongs and turned back toward the center of the room, her eyes fixed firmly on the polished marble floor. As she approached Sung-ho, the older man intentionally shifted his weight. Just as she extended her hand to drop the ice into his glass, he drove his elbow backward with brutal force. The heavy crystal glass shattered against the edge of the table, sending shards of thick glass and dark amber liquid exploding across the floor and splashing violently onto Maya's worn shoes. The council members erupted into low, cruel laughter. Sung-ho turned to her, his face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. He cursed her in harsh Korean, calling her a clumsy, worthless idiot, and ordered her to get on her knees to clean up the mess with her bare hands. Seo Jun sat perfectly still across the table, his jaw muscles clenching tight beneath his skin. He looked down at the shattered glass and then up at Maya. A dangerous, silent energy radiated from him. In the strict, ruthless code of the underworld, intervening over the treatment of a servant during a peace negotiation was a sign of unforgivable weakness. It would completely shatter the fragile truce they were supposedly building. But his eyes betrayed a flicker of intense, barely contained fury. He watched as the woman slowly lowered herself to the floor. The humiliation was absolute, designed solely to remind everyone in the room that Sung-ho was a king who could break anyone he chose. Maya did not rush. She did not show fear. She knelt among the jagged pieces of crystal, feeling the cold damp seep through the fabric of her uniform. The trap was fully set, the tension pulled tight as a wire, and the men above her were completely blind to the fact that the invisible woman they were mocking held their very lives in the palm of her hand. The boardroom fell into a suffocating heavy silence, broken only by the relentless pounding of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows and the soft, scraping sound of Maya gathering broken glass. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, each second pulling Seo Jun closer to his execution. Sung-ho pushed the thick leather-bound contract across the polished wood, the gold-embossed lettering catching the dim light. He smiled broadly, gesturing toward the dotted line with an open, inviting hand. He spoke in smooth English, urging Seo Jun to sign the paper so they could finally solidify their brotherhood and usher in an era of unparalleled wealth. The other 4 council members leaned forward in their seats like vultures anticipating a meal. Maya kept her head bowed, her bare hands carefully picking up the sharp, blood-stained shards. The jagged edge of a crystal piece sliced a thin, clean line across her palm, but she did not even flinch. The physical pain was nothing compared to the fiery determination burning inside her chest. She had spent 5 years memorizing their ledgers, tracking their shipments, and learning the darkest corners of their sprawling empire. She had watched them destroy families, poison neighborhoods, and laugh while doing it. Tonight, the reign of the old guard would violently end. She watched Seo Jun from the corner of her eye. The young boss reached inside his tailored jacket and slowly pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. He held it between his fingers, his eyes locking onto Sung-ho's face, searching for the trap he knew had to be there but could not see. He was a brilliant strategist, a man who had survived countless assassination attempts by anticipating every move, but he was completely isolated in this room. He did not know about the snipers positioned on the rooftop across the narrow street. He did not know that the men sitting beside Sung-ho had already unholstered their suppressed weapons beneath the table. Maya let the bloody pieces of glass fall softly into her apron. She took a deep, steadying breath. This was the moment of no return. If she spoke, her cover as the invisible cleaner would be permanently destroyed. She would become a prime target for every remaining loyalist in the Korean mafia. But if she remained silent, the only man who possessed the power and the vision to tear down the corrupt council would die before the ink dried. Seo Jun slowly uncapped the gold pen. The metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. He lowered the nib toward the thick, expensive paper. Maya stopped moving. The ticking of the clock seemed to freeze. She placed her hands flat against the cold marble floor and slowly began to rise. The gold nib of the pen was a fraction of an inch from the paper when a voice cut through the heavy silence of the room. It was not a loud shout, nor was it the trembling whisper of a frightened maid. It was a commanding, ice-cold voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. Maya stood at her full height, ignoring the blood dripping from her hand. She stared directly at Seo Jun and told him in perfectly clear English not to sign the document. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The 5 council members froze in their chairs, their faces contorted in sheer disbelief. A low-born cleaner had dared to interrupt the most critical negotiation of the decade. Sung-ho slammed his heavy fists onto the mahogany table, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He roared at her in vicious, rapid-fire Korean, demanding to know how she dared to speak, threatening to have her torn apart for her insolence. Maya did not cower. She did not lower her eyes. Instead, she stepped forward, stepping directly into the pool of light cast by the chandelier above the table. The terrified, submissive posture vanished entirely. She stood with the fierce, unyielding pride of a queen. When she opened her mouth to answer, she did not speak in English. She spoke in flawless, high-status Korean. Her pronunciation so sharp and perfect it physically shocked the men at the table. She told Sung-ho that his threats were as hollow as his honor. The older men gasped, their eyes wide with terror as they realized the depth of their fatal mistake. But Maya was not finished. She turned her gaze to the second-in-command, the man who had finalized the assassination plot just moments before. She seamlessly shifted from formal Korean into the harsh, guttural Jeju regional dialect they had used to seal Seo Jun's fate. She repeated their exact words back to them, detailing the snipers on the roof and the weapons hidden beneath the table. She told them that their secret language was not a shield, but the very weapon she was using to destroy them. The silence that followed was deafening. The impenetrable armor of the Mafia Council shattered into a million pieces. Seo Jun stood up slowly, the gold pen dropping from his fingers and rolling across the table. His dark eyes locked onto Maya, burning with a mixture of absolute shock and profound, overwhelming respect. The invisible woman had just flipped the world upside down. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The neon-washed light flickered against the glass walls, painting the stunned faces of the council in sickly blue and red. Maya stood in the center of the room, her breathing steady, her bloodied hand curled into a tight fist at her side. She had ripped the mask from their world in a single breath. The older men stared at her as if a statue had suddenly come to life and begun reciting their darkest sins. Sung-ho was the first to react. His shock twisted into frothing rage. He shot to his feet, veins bulging in his neck, spitting furious words in Korean. He called her a dog, a traitor, a filthy foreign spy. He ordered his second-in-command to shoot her where she stood. His hand darted under the table for the hidden weapon. Maya did not flinch. In the same harsh Jeju dialect, she calmly repeated his last order out loud, exposing him again in front of every man at the table. She told them all that the snipers were waiting for a signal that would now never come. She had heard the rooftop coordinates. She had memorized the deployment schedule. If a single bullet was fired tonight, she promised every secret she carried would be sold to their enemies by sunrise. The second-in-command hesitated, his hand trembling beneath the table. The balance of power was tilting, the foundations cracking. If she truly knew everything, killing her here would be like setting fire to a warehouse soaked in gasoline. Seo Jun slowly stepped away from his chair, the muscles in his shoulders relaxing as if a weight he did not know he carried had just slipped off. He understood exactly what she had done. She had not only exposed the assassination plot, she had taken control of the narrative in the one language they thought they owned. He spoke for the first time since she revealed herself. His deep voice cut through the air, quiet but unyielding. He addressed Maya in Korean, asking how long she had been listening. Maya turned to him, her eyes meeting his without a trace of fear. 5 years, she answered. 5 years of cleaning their blood, their lies, their greed from these floors. Her voice did not shake. She looked back at Sung-ho and told him that every cruel word, every order, every betrayal was stored in her memory like ammunition. The council members shifted uncomfortably. A lifetime of sins, suddenly placed in the hands of the woman they had forced to her knees. The ghosts they had created had returned to claim their due. The heavy tension in the room snapped like a wire. The second-in-command finally moved, but not to draw his weapon. Instead he slowly lifted both hands above the polished edge of the table, revealing his empty palms. The message was clear. He was not willing to die tonight for a chairman who had underestimated the wrong woman. Sung-ho saw the betrayal and roared with outrage. He lunged for the underside of the table again, desperate to regain control with brute force. Before his fingers reached the hidden gun, Seo Jun was already in motion. Years of training coiled and released in a single fluid step. He seized Sung-ho's wrist, twisting it with precise, merciless strength. The older man cried out as bone and tendon strained. The suppressed handgun slid from its compartment into Seo Jun's waiting hand. In one smooth motion, Seo Jun unloaded the weapon and tossed it onto the table, the metal clattering loudly. The council members flinched, exposed in their own lair. Seo Jun did not raise his voice. He ordered everyone at the table to keep their hands visible. The cold authority in his tone left no room for argument. These were not suggestions. They were commands from a man who had just survived a carefully orchestrated death trap. Maya stepped closer, her footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous room. The rain outside began to ease, as if the storm itself were listening. She circled behind the chairs, her gaze hard and unwavering. She addressed each man in turn, calling them by name, reciting in calm detail the crimes they thought had been buried. Bribes paid to judges. Children orphaned by their vendettas. Entire neighborhoods poisoned by their product. For each revelation, their shoulders hunched a little more, their faces paling. She knew where their families slept. She knew which foreign banks held their laundered fortunes. The man with the jagged scar across his jaw tried to regain the upper hand. He sneered and accused her of bluffing, claiming no maid could hold that much information without slipping. Maya did not respond with words. She rattled off a string of account numbers and shipping codes only he and his personal accountant knew. His bravado evaporated in an instant. Seo Jun watched silently, his eyes following her every move. The invisible maid was not merely fluent. She was a walking archive, a strategist who had mapped their empire from the shadows. He realized something else. She had chosen this moment carefully. Not before he arrived, not after his death, but at the exact second their signatures would have bound him to their treachery. She had not just saved his life. She had given him a weapon more powerful than any gun in the room. The council understood it too. The laughter they once threw at her like scraps had died completely. In its place was something new. Fear. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet glass, indifferent to the quiet war erupting in the clouds. Inside, the last illusion of council invincibility crumbled. Sung-ho, stripped of his theatrics, stared at Maya with dawning horror. He demanded to know who she was working for. A rival syndicate. Police. Foreign intelligence agency. His mind clawed for any explanation that did not involve his own arrogance breeding the architect of his downfall. Maya's lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile. She told him she had once been nothing. A girl who scrubbed kitchens, who listened to her grandmother switch between lullabies and Jeju curses. A woman who came to this city searching for work and found only doors slammed in her face, until one night a man from his network offered her a job cleaning these floors. He had assumed she did not understand a word he said. That mistake had grown into a blade she now held at his throat. She moved to the wall and pressed a button on the intercom panel. With crisp, calm Korean, she informed building security that the meeting was proceeding smoothly and no additional staff were needed. Then she cut the line. It was a message meant for everyone in the room. No one was coming to save them. Seo Jun stepped closer to the head of the table, his presence now filling the space Sung-ho once dominated. He spoke to the council, outlining their situation in brutal simplicity. Their assassination attempt had failed. Their secrets were no longer safe. Their control over the city was broken the moment they dismissed the woman who had been listening. Sung-ho tried one last desperate angle. He promised Maya wealth, passage out of the country, a new identity, if she would sell Seo Jun out instead. The offer reeked of panic. His voice, once so smooth and commanding, cracked around the edges. Maya regarded him with cool, unblinking eyes. She reminded him of the night she had watched his men drag a crying mother out of this very building after she begged for her son's life. She reminded him how he had laughed, how he wiped imaginary dirt from his sleeve as if the woman's grief had stained him. That was the night Maya decided to become more than a ghost. There was no amount of money that could buy back the dead. Seo Jun nodded slightly, recognizing the moment had come. He snapped his fingers. The side door opened and his own men flooded into the room, dressed in dark suits, their movements disciplined and precise. Within seconds, the council members found themselves staring down the barrels of sleek black pistols. The old world order had been overturned. Not in a hail of unseen sniper fire, but under the watchful gaze of the maid they had once forced to scrub whiskey from the floor. The room transformed from a throne room into a courtroom without a judge. The council sat rigid in their chairs, weapons pointed at their chests, stripped of all their accustomed power. The cigarette smoke that once crowned them now hung around their heads like a fading curse. Seo Jun walked slowly around the table, his footsteps measured, his eyes never leaving the men who had tried to bury him. He stopped behind Sung Ho and rested his hand on the back of the chairman's leather chair. He could have ordered their execution on the spot. It would have been easy, even expected in their world. But he glanced toward Maya and saw something in her expression. Not mercy but precision. She had not gone to such lengths merely to spill blood. She wanted something larger, something that would echo beyond this room. He asked her what justice looked like to her. Not in numbers. In truth. Maya took her time before answering. She walked slowly to the far end of the table, where an empty leather chair sat like a forgotten throne. She untied the thin apron from around her waist and let it slip from her fingers. The gray fabric crumpled on the floor like a shed skin. Justice, she said, would begin with the end of their legend. No more whispered stories of untouchable kings. The city would see them for what they truly were. Frightened old men who hid behind language and money. She proposed that every ledger, every account, every dirty contract she had memorized be used to dismantle their network piece by piece. Their assets seized. Their loyalists scattered. Their names turned from warnings into lessons. Seo Jun listened, then gave a single decisive nod. He ordered his men to remove the council members from their seats. Not to kill them, but to take them to the secure locations he controlled, where their confessions and information would be extracted and recorded. Their own empire would become the foundation of something new, something less rotten, if not clean then at least contained. As the last of the council was led from the room, Sung Ho fought against the hands gripping his arms. He turned back toward Maya, his eyes blazing. He shouted that she would never belong, that no matter how perfect her Korean became, she would always be an outsider. Maya did not argue. She simply held his gaze and replied that an outsider had just ended his reign. The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his voice forever. Silence settled over the boardroom. The rain had finally stopped. The city lights shone clear through the glass, no longer distorted by the storm. Seo Jun walked to the head of the table and paused. Instead of taking the chairman's seat, he pulled the heavy leather chair back and turned to Maya. He told her there was no returning to invisibility after tonight. She had chosen to step into the light, and he would not let her stand there alone. He gestured for her to sit. For a long moment, Maya simply looked at the empty seat. She thought of her grandmother's stories, of the women in her family who had never been allowed into rooms like this unless they were cleaning them. She thought of every insult, every spilled drink, every night she had gone home with the stink of cigar smoke in her hair. Then she straightened her shoulders and stepped forward. She sat in the chair that had once belonged to the man who tried to kill them both. The leather was still warm from his body, but it no longer felt like his. Felt like a beginning. Seo Jun took the seat beside her, not above her. Partners at the table. Maya rested her uninjured hand on the polished surface and let her eyes sweep across the city that sprawled beneath them. The ghosts of the old order still lingered in the corners, but they no longer frightened her. Tonight the maid had spoken, and the whole world would learn to listen.